Coming up on the program today, South Africa bonds rally after Moody's rating reprieve. Sudan agrees reforms with World Bank, IMF, and the African Development Bank. And World Bank ready to spend $5 billion in Congo, but with conditions. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Chimezi Obi Iwagu. Let's get the show started now with the markets. And riding on Moody's reprieve, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange edged higher with the index up 0.38% at intraday. Stocks edged higher with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange Top 40 Index up 0.25%. The Nigerian equities market was also in the green, looking poised to start the week on a positive note. The markets in Egypt also traded positive, up 0.21%. The Nairobi Stock Index also closed positive at 3.01% on Friday. And in the Middle East, most of the markets were in the green at intraday except Abu Dhabi. The Abu Dhabi's index fell 0.26% as Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank dropped 1.1%, while Emirates Telecommunications Group was down 0.2%. The Dubai index rose marginally at 0.01%. In Saudi Arabia, the stock index rose 0.05%, supported by gains in banking shares and corporate earnings, even as Saudi Aramco on Sunday announced its intention to float on the domestic stock market in what could be the world's biggest listing as the kingdom seeks to diversify its economy away from oil. Now, the Qatari index also traded positive, rising higher at 0.26%. In the UK, the government is facing calls to overhaul its high street policies after estimates were made at 85,000 retail sector job losses on a year ago. Now, the British Retail Consortium made the calculation after finding that the number of retail employees in the third quarter fell by 2.8% on a year earlier. Now, the latest about to call in administrator is baby goods retailer Mothercare. Well, Juliana will tell us more. But first, let's talk about the new deal by British Airways. Good afternoon, Juliana. Well, British Airways just announced a $1.1 billion cash deal for Air Europa. How big is this deal?
Well, it's a big deal. At early trading, the International Airlines Group, they're the owner of British Airways. Their shares rose by about 6.5p. But it is a pretty shocking deal because British Airways have really suffered over the past couple of months. Of course, that pilot strike cost them about £180 million. But they are going to complete this deal with Spain's third largest air carrier, which is Air Europa. Willie Walsh, he's the owner of IAG. He's put in a cash bid of €1 billion. And this is really to expand their southern Atlantic reach. Air Europa have got about 66 planes and they fly into Latin America and certain parts of the south of the Atlantic. And really what IAG was saying today is that they want Madrid and Spain to be a competitor to the likes of Heathrow and Amsterdam.
Another corporate news now, Mothercare plans to call in administrators to its troubled firm's UK business, putting about 2,500 jobs at risk. What is in Mothercare's radical restructuring plan and why are its UK shops closing up?
Well, unfortunately, it's not a restructuring. They're out. They've called in the administrators and their bosses have admitted that it's just too competitive for them to compete with the big supermarkets and the online discounters that are able to offer, who were their customers, much cheaper rates. Last year, they closed about 50 of its stores and they have tried to sell Mothercare for a long time now unsuccessfully. So the administrators have been called in. That will affect 77 stores across the UK. And as you said, Chimmy, 2,500 jobs, 2,000 of them being part-time, 500 being full-time. And we have seen this time and time again of the British high street. It's just so competitive. And if consumers are not spending and don't want to spend at those premium prices, they'll go online where they can get bigger discounts. So Mothercare is another one that bites the dust.
Oh. All right, let's look at the data front. That's the construction PMI released today, which shows the sector rose slightly, but activity shrank for the 6th consecutive month. Is this a market-moving data today?
Yes and no, Chimmy. It's definitely a big story. Of course, we watch those PMI data very closely because that just gives the shape of how British GDP is going. And yes, PMI for construction has fallen yet again. It's about 44.2. It is slightly up from the 43.3 it read in September. But of course, 50 is that threshold for contraction or expansion. A lot of people are citing Brexit. Some economists are doing that. And they've also said that those big infrastructure projects, which the industry really relies on, are just not happening. But let's have a look at the data for intraday. The FTSE All-Share is up 0.88%. FTSE 100 is up by 1.03%, and the FTSE 250 is up by 0.32%. In currencies, the British pound is down on the US dollar by 0.17%, also down on the euro by 0.12%, and down on the Japanese yen by 0.11% today.
Well, thank you, Juliana, and enjoy the rest of the day. And European stocks traded higher this morning as renewed optimism over U.S.-China trade talks looked set to reignite risk on approach from investors. For more from the European space, let's talk to Chelsea. Hello, Chelsea. Good afternoon. Well, Saudi Aramco has launched its highly anticipated initial public offering. Of course, that is expected to be the largest share sale ever. Are European investors interested in buying into the oil giant?
There's definitely going to be interest in this IPO. It's, as you said, it's supposed to be the largest IPO ever. And if you think about it, Saudi Aramco is the most profitable company in the world. It made over $100 billion in profits last year. It's a huge amount, more than any other company. They continue to pump about 10% of the world's oil. So for commodity investors, this surely is an opportunity. I think there's still a lot of concerns and a lot of questions for investors, though. One of those is going to be the valuation of Saudi Aramco in this deal. The company has said they think they should be valued about $2 trillion. Investors are not so sure it should be that high. So I think there could be some hesitance around the valuation if investors feel like they're valuing the company too high. Another big question is going to be about the path of oil. Oil prices have been not too low, but they've been falling, and there's a concern about a looming glut. So that could certainly weigh on Saudi Aramco and sort of dull investor appetite for this. And then the third big overhanging question here is things like corporate governance. And Saudi Aramco has tried to become more transparent and improve its corporate governance, but there's still a lot of questions, especially among Western investors, about whether this is a company they really want to be investing in.
All right, at the ECB, Christine Lagarde will give her first speech as president tonight in Berlin. What should markets look out for?
This is going to be very closely watched. It's a speech for the Bundestag president, so it's not it's not specifically focused on her monetary policy views. That being said, they typically do tend to drop some hints and speeches like this. And it's also her first since she took over on Friday. So I think investors are going to be looking for any sort of indication about how Christine Lagarde is feeling about the European economy, whether she thinks that they could need more quantitative easings in the near future, whether she doesn't think that. I think it's going to be very closely parsed for any sort of indication on the health of the European economy and the prospect for more easing. I think they're also going to look for more indications on how she's thinking about fiscal policy. She's been out pretty aggressively over the past couple of weeks calling for countries with budget surpluses like Germany to spend more, but there's a lot of questions about how she can sort of make that happen. So I think investors are also going to be looking for any sort of fiscal policy signals from her as well tonight.
All right, we'll watch out to hear what she has to say today. Thank you, Chelsea, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
And shares in Asia rose today amid optimism on the U.S.-China trade front. Mainland Chinese shares advanced on the day with the Shanghai Composite up 0.58% to about 2,975.49. The Shenzhen Composite advanced 0.52%. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index jumped to 1.38%. Elsewhere, South Korea's Kospi advanced to 1.43%. In Australia, the S&P ASX 200 rose 0.27%. Well, markets in Japan were closed for a holiday. All right, away from the equities market and back here on the African continent, Moody's Investors Services decided not to downgrade the country's credit score to junk, although it did reduce the outlook to negative. Well, Moody's said the outlook revision on its Baa3 rating, the lowest rank of investment grade, was motivated by a deterioration in the economic growth outlook and rising debt. Let's hear what the analysts think about this rating, and joining me now is an economic analyst in South Africa, Trinity Nkube. Good afternoon, Mr. Nkube. Thank you for joining us.
Great for seeing you again. How is everything going?
Very well, thank you. Well, Moody's did not downgrade South Africa's rating, but reduced its outlook to negative. Was this in line with expectations?
Yeah, I could say the sentiment across a lot of our professionals is that we were going to dodge this one for now. Yeah, so I wasn't at all surprised with what has happened now, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Midterm budget presented by the finance minister on Wednesday last week kind of painted a bleak picture. How bad is the situation?
Well, there are no other ways of putting this. The economy is in a bad state. However, there's a bit of willingness on the part of the finance ministry and the national treasury in terms of getting us to consolidate some of the taxes and a lot of work behind trying to get more revenues. But at the same time, the spending needs keep increasing. So there's a bit of a challenge there. But yes, things are bad. We'll wait to see what happens in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, of course, the negative outlook means there is a window of 12 to 18 months in which a downgrade could be delivered, but it could come sooner if Moody's isn't impressed by the fiscal picture presented at the next budget statement in February. So what options are there for Ramaphosa and his team to avert this?
If you remember, we spoke about the possibility of an IMF bailout a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
It's looking very likely we might be going towards that end. At the end of the day, we are paying a price for the poor planning and lack of implementation. Now is very urgent. The only way to try and get some revenues through e-tolls and expanding some of the tax revenues.
Okay.
Other than that, I see IMF coming through.
Sure. Of course, one of the greatest worries is rising government debt. And now we saw Ramaphosa's government, promising ESCOM about 230 billion rand of bailouts over the next decade. That's on top of a $59 billion special appropriation that was over the next 2 fiscal years. But analysts say it will need more state money than that. Are you one of those who think so, and why?
Absolutely. The level of debt right now is unsustainable. Where are we going to get these funds? It looks more and more likely that we'll have to borrow. Unfortunately, the capacity to borrow is quickly being eroded. So one wonders how we're going to maneuver this. There has to be a lot that can happen within the next 12 to 18 months for that sort of plan to be sustainable.
All right, in all of these, what does the future look like for South Africa?
At this point, it looks very bleak. However, we can always be hopeful because a lot of economies also are going through tough times. So a lot of local or domestic solutions are needed in terms of driving the small to medium businesses so we can create more jobs and have more people active in the non-traditional sectors, particularly tourism. I mean, we just won the World Cup. So hopefully we can push through some of the positives to invite, foreign domestic investment as well as private domestic investors.
All right, let's keep up the optimism. Thank you, Mr. Nkube, for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
Right. Meanwhile, the country's dollar-denominated sovereign bonds jumped and yields of the local 10-year benchmark eased today after Pretoria escaped a regulation to junk status by ratings agency Moody's in the wake of last week's bleak midterm budget. Our local bond yields eased across the curve, with a 10-year benchmark yield slipping to 8.4% and 18 basis points decline from the Friday close. Meanwhile, longer-dated Eurobonds bonds enjoyed the biggest gains, with a 2041 issue adding as much as 1.5 cents in the dollar to trade at 109.028 cents. And after the break, Sudan agrees roadmap to rehabilitate country. These and more in a moment.